so in today's lecture we will be looking into the Constitution, why and how. Okay, this chapter is a chapter in political science. Okay, this book is about working of the Indian Constitution, and in the chapters in the chapters that we in the chapters that follow, we will read information about various aspects of the working of our constitution. You will learn about the various institutions of the government in our country and their relationship with each other. But before you begin to read about elections, governments, and presidents and prime ministers, it is necessary to understand what the entire structure of the government and the various principles that bind the institutions of the government have their origin in the constitution. So after reading this chapter, we will be able to learn what a constitution means, what a constitution does to the society, how constitutions govern the allocation of power in the society, and what was the way in which constitution of India was made. Okay, now why do we need a constitution? Okay, now what is a constitution? What are its functions? What role does it perform in a society? How does a constitution relate to our daily existence? Answering these questions is not as difficult as you might think. Okay, constitution allows coordination and assurance. Imagine yourself to be a member of the reasonably large group as a majority community. Further, imagine that this group has the following characteristics. The members of the groups are diverse in various ways. They have different religious allegations that they are Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and Sikh, and so on. They are also varied in different respect. People in Kerala is different, people in Delhi are different. Okay, people in Assam are different. Okay, and they have different abilities and different professions. Okay, and different taste in everything from films to books. Some are rich, some are poor, some are old. So people are basically very diverse. Okay, so so what happened? How much? So there should be some sort of disputes or some sort of clashes or some sort of limitations to the society that should be ensured. Okay, how much property one should be allowed to own? Should it be compulsory that every child be sent to school, or should parents should be allowed to decide? How much should this group spend on its safety and security? All these kinds of questions are right. They require the cooperation of each other. What will ensure the group to live together peacefully? So since there is so much diversity in the group, so what will ensure the group to live together in cooperation with each other? What is the basis of this? One may say that perhaps members of this group can live together if they agree to some basic rules. Okay, why will the group need certain basic rules? Think of what would happen in the absence of some basic rules. Every individual would be insecure simply because they would not know what members of this group could do to each other. Who could claim rights over what? Any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and known to all members of the group, and to achieve a minimal degree of coordination. But these rules must not only be known, they must also be enforceable. If citizens have no assurance that others will follow these rules, they will themselves have no reason to follow these rules. Saying that the rules are legally enforceable gives an assurance to everybody that others will follow this. If they do not do so, they will be punished. The first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of the society. Okay. Now, specification of decision making powers. A constitution is a body of fundamental principles according to which a state is constituted or governed. Okay, what makes them fundamental? Well, the first question you will have to decide is who gets to decide what laws governing the society. So who are these people to decide? Okay, you may want rule X, but others may want rule Y. Some people want dictatorship, some people want democracy, some people want monarchy. So how will that be decided? How do we decide who rules and preferences should govern us? Okay, you may think that rules you want everyone to live by are the best, but others think that their rules are the best. Okay, how do we solve this dispute? So even before you decide what rules should govern this group, you have to decide who gets to decide. Okay, the constitution has to provide an answer to this question. It specifies a basic allocation of power in a society. It decides who gets to decide what laws will be. In principle, this question, who gets to decide, can be answered in many ways. In a monarchical constitution, a monarch decides. In some constitutions like the old Soviet Union, a single party was given the power to decide. But in democratic constitutions like ours, broadly speaking, people get to decide. But this matter is not so simple. Before even if you answer what that the people should decide, it will not answer the question. How should the people decide? What is a procedure for something to be law? Should everyone agree to it? Should the people directly vote for each other as the ancient Greeks did? Or should the people express their preferences by electing representatives? But if the people act through their representatives, how should these representatives be elected? How many should be there? In the Indian Constitution, for example, it is specified that in most instances, Parliament gets to decide laws and politics, and that Parliament itself be organized in a particular manner. Before identifying what the law in any given society is, you have to identify who has the authority to enact it. If Parliament has authority to enact laws, there must be a law that bestows this authority on Parliament. So, if Parliament is the supreme power in a country, there should be a law or there should be a written form in which that states that the Parliament is the highest form of authority in the country, isn't it? This function goes to the Constitution. Okay, it is an authority that constitutes government in the first place. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the power to make decisions in the society. It decides how the government will be constituted. Okay. First to us the function to provide a set of rules, basic rules that allow a minimal coordination amongst members of the society. Second is who is given the power. Okay, it decides who should have the power. Limitations on the powers of government. But this is clearly not enough. Suppose you decided who had the authority to make decisions, but then this authority passed laws that you thought were patently unfair. It prohibited you from practicing your religion, for instance, or it enjoined that clothes of a certain color. Suppose there are some restrictions that are put about by the constitution. You would obviously think that these laws are unjust and unfair. And even though they are passed by a government that had come into existence based on certain procedures, there would be something obviously unjust about the government enacting these laws. Okay, so the third function of the constitution is to set some limits on what a government can impose on its citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. Constitutions limit the power of government in many ways. The most common way of limiting power of government is to specify certain fundamental rights. Okay, that all of us possess as citizens and which no government can ever be allowed to violate. The exact content and interpretation of these rights varies from constitution to constitution. But most constitutions will protect a basic cluster of rights. Citizens will be protected from being arrested arbitrarily and for no reason. This is one of the basic limitations upon the power of government. Citizens will normally have the right to some basic liberties. Okay, like freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom to conduct business, trade, etc. Okay, in practice, these rights can be limited during times of national emergency, and the Constitution specifies the circumstances under which these rights may be withdrawn. Okay, now aspirations and goals of a society. Most of the older constitutions limited themselves largely to allocating decision-making powers and setting some limits to the government power. But many 20th century constitutions, for which the Indian Constitution is the finest example, also provide an enabling framework for the government to do certain positive things, to express the aspirations and goals of society. How do they do it? The Indian Constitution was particularly innovative in this respect. Societies with deep entrenched inequalities of various kinds Even when the constitution was being drafted, there was a huge communal violence going on in our country. Okay, even under that immense pressure, we came up with a very strong constitution. Okay, deeply entrenched inequalities of various kinds will not only have to set limits on the powers of government, they will also have to enable and empower the government to make positive measures to overcome forms of inequality or deprivation. Okay, for example, India aspires to be a society that is free of caste discrimination. If this is our society's aspiration, the government will have to be enabled or empowered to take all the necessary steps to achieve this goal. In a country like South Africa, which had a deep history of racial discrimination, its new constitution had to enable the government to end racial discrimination. More positively, what happened? The constitution may enshrine the aspirations of a society. Okay, based on the needs of the society, based on how the society is established, the constitution should be formed. The framers of the Indian constitution, for example, thought that each individual in a society should have all that is necessary for them to lead a life of minimal dignity and social self-respect, minimum material well-being, education, etc. The Indian constitution enables the government to take positive welfare measures, some of which are legally enforceable. As we go on studying the Indian constitution, we will find that such enabling provisions have the support of the preamble of our constitution, and these provisions are found in the section of fundamental rights. The directive principles of state policy also enjoin government to fulfill certain aspirations of the people. So this is a cartoon that the constitution makers have to address themselves to very different aspirations. Here Nehru is trying to balance between different visions and ideology. When we discuss about the Constituent Assembly and all, we will see how diverse was the Constituent Assembly. Okay, it literally represented every community or every aspect of the society in India. Okay, constitutions, enabling provisions of the constitution. Constitutions are not only rules and regulations in controlling the powers of the government, they also give powers to the government for pursuing collective good of the society. Constitution of South Africa assigns many responsibility to the government. It wants the government to make measures to promote conservation of nature, make efforts to protect persons or groups subjected to unfair discrimination, and provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthcare, etc. In the case of Indonesia, what is there? The government is enjoined to establish, conduct national education system. The Indonesian constitution ensures that the poor and the destitute children will be looked after by the government. Now, fundamental identity of a people. Finally, and perhaps even most importantly, a constitution expresses the fundamental identity of a people. Okay, it means people as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitution. It is being agreeing to a basic set of norms about how one should be governed and who should be governed, that one forms a collective identity. One has many sets of identities that exist prior to a constitution, but by agreeing to certain basic norms and principles, one constitutes one's basic political identity. Second, a constitutional norms are the overarching framework within which one pursues individual aspirations, goals, and freedoms. The Constitution sets authoritative constraints upon what we may or may not do so. It defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. So, the Constitution also gives one a moral identity. Third and finally, what all it gives? It gives a political identity. Second, constitutional norms are overreaching frameworks, and it gives a moral identity. Third and finally, it may be case that many basic political and moral values are now shared across different constitutional traditions. Okay, now if one may look around the world, they differ in many respects. In the form of government, they enjoy in many procedural details, but they also share a good deal. Most modern constitutions create a form of government that is democratic in some respects. Most claim to protect certain basic rights. But constitutions are different in the way they embody conceptions of national identity. Most nations are an amalgamation of a complex set of historical traditions. They weave together the diverse groups that reside between the nation in different ways. For example, German identity was constituted by being ethnically German. The constitution gave the expression of this identity. The Indian constitution, on the other hand, does not make ethnic identity a criterion for citizenship. So this is a very important MCQ point. Do Indian constitution identify any certain ethnic community or ethnic group as its citizens? No. Okay. Different nations embody different conceptions of what the relationship between different regions of a nation and the central government should be. The relationship constitutes a national identity of the nation. So this is an image in which the writing of the new constitution after the collapse of Saddam Hussein regime. Okay, it is a conflict between certain ethnic communities. There are Sunnis there, Shiites are there, Kurd communities there. All these people were conflicting. Okay, because each of them identified Iraq to be their own home and their own rather than sharing with different other two communities. The authority of a constitution. We have outlined some of the functions a constitution performs. These functions explain why most societies have a constitution. But there are three further questions we can ask about constitutions. Okay, what are they? What is a constitution? How effective is a constitution? Is a constitution just? In most countries, constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles that about the state, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms it should follow. When we ask for constitution of a country, we are usually referring to this document. But some countries, the United Kingdom for instance, they do not have a single document that can be called the constitution. They have an unwritten constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that taken collectively are referred to as the constitution. So, we can say that the constitution is a document or a set of documents that seeks to perform the functions that we mentioned above. But many constitutions around the world exist only on paper. They are mere words existing in the parchment. The crucial question is, how effective is a constitution? What makes it effective? What ensures that it has a real impact on the lives of people? Making a constitution effective depends upon many factors. The mode of promulgation. This refers to how a constitution comes into being. Who crafted the constitution and how much authority did they have? In many countries, constitutions remain defect because they are crafted by military leaders or leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. The most successful constitutions like India, South Africa and the United States are constitutions which are created in the aftermath of a popular national movement. Although India's constitution was formally created by a constituent assembly between December 1946 and November 1949, it drew upon a long history of nationalist movement that had a remarkable ability to take along different sections of Indian society together. The constitution drew enormous legitimacy from the fact that it was drawn up by people who enjoyed immense public credibility, who had the capacity to negotiate and command the respect of a wide cross section of society, who were able to convince the people that the constitution was not an instrument for the aggrandizement of personal power. The final document reflected the broad national consensus at that time. Some countries have subjected their constitution to a full-fledged referendum where all the people vote on the desirability of the constitution. The Indian constitution was never subjected to a referendum, but nevertheless carried enormous public authority because it had the consents and backing of leaders who were themselves popular. Although the constitution itself was not subjected to a referendum, the people adapted it as their own by abiding by its provisions. Therefore, the authority of people who enact the constitution helps determine in part its prospect for success. The substantiative provisions of a constitution. It is a hallmark of a successful constitution that it gives everyone in a society some reason to go along with its provision. Why should you follow the constitution? A constitution that, for instance, permanent majorities to allowed permanent majorities to oppress minority groups within society would give minority no reason to go along with the provision of the constitution. or a constitution that systematically privileged some members at the expense of others, or that systematically entrenched the power of small groups in society, would cease to command allegiance. People will have no respect for those kind of constitution. If any group feels their identity is being stifled, they will have no reason to abide by the constitution. No constitution by itself achieves perfect justice, but it has to convince people that it provides a framework for pursuing basic justice. Do this thought experiment. Ask yourself this question: what would be the content of some basic rules in society such that they give everyone a reason to go along with them? What that everyone that allows that creates a mindset in which, yeah, this constitution has something for me that I should follow. Okay. Balanced institutional design. Constitutions are often subverted or not by the people but by small groups. It can be influenced by the benefit of certain powerful or a small amount of people. One way of such intelligent designing of a constitution in order to ensure that that kind of monopoly of power never happens is that this is often done by fragmenting power across different institutions. In the Indian constitution, for example, we have horizontally fragments of power, that is the legislature, executive and judiciary, and even independent statutory bodies like election commission. Okay. This ensures that even if one institution wants to subvert the constitution, others can check its transgressions. An intelligent system of checks and balances has facilitated the success of the Indian constitution. Another important aspect of intelligent institutional design is that an institution must strike the right balance between certain values, norms, and procedures as authoritative, and at the same time allow enough flexibility. It should not be too rigid, nor it should not be too flexible. Okay, there should be certain provisions in our constitution that that cannot be changed. For example, the secular nature of our country, that cannot be changed. The democratic nature of our constitution, that are the rigid aspects of our constitution, that cannot be changed. While certain laws related to the IT, the cryptocurrency, these are the new things. So we cannot say that we are against all these things, because in the future these are beneficial things. So that kind of aspect should change. There should be some flexibility in that kind of certain areas. Okay. How was the Indian constitution made? Okay, now we are going to look into the history of Indian constitution. So the history of constitution begins even before the partition of India, and at a time when the British were still ruling in our country. Okay, the idea of constitution was put forward by M. N. Roy, a pioneer in the communist movement in India. Okay, it held its first sitting on 9 December 1946 and reassembled as Constituent Assembly for divided India on 14th August 1947. Its members were chosen by indirect election by the members of provincial legislative assemblies. It was an indirect election. Who chose them? It was chosen by the members of provincial legislative assemblies that had been established under which Act? Government of India Act 1935. Okay, the Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of British Cabinet, known as the Cabinet Mission. Okay, according to this plan, okay, we'll just go through it, let's read through it. Okay, now composition of the Constituent Assembly, because this question, there can be a question that how diverse was the Constituent Assembly, or there are certain criticism related to Constituent Assembly that they were dominated by a certain community, they were dominated by a certain political party. But you need to look into the fact that how much diversity existed in the Constituent Assembly. As a consequence of the partition under the plan of 3rd June 1947, those members who were elected from territories which fell under the Pakistan ceased to be members of the Constituent Assembly. The number of the members of the Assembly was reduced to 299. The Constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, and 284 members were actually present at that time. Okay, they appended their signature to the Constitution and the Constitution was finally passed. The Constitution came into force on 26 January 1950. Okay, the constitution was thus framed against the backdrop of horrendous violence. As I have told you, that time there was a communal violence going on due to the partition. But it is a tribute to the fortitude of the framers that they were not only able to draft a constitution under immense pressure, but also learned the right lessons from the unimaginable violence that accompanied the partition. The constitution was committed to a new conception of citizenship, where not only would minorities would be secure, but religious identity would have no bearing on citizenship rights. But this account of the composition of Constituent Assembly that drafted the Constitution touches upon only the surface of how our Constitution was made. Although the members of the Constituent Assembly were not elected by universal suffrage, there was a serious attempt to make the Assembly a representative body. How? Members of all religions were given representation under the scheme described above. In addition, the Assembly had 28 members from the scheduled caste. In terms of political parties, the Congress dominated the Assembly, occupying as many as 82% of seats in the Assembly after partition. Congress itself was such a diverse party that it managed to accommodate almost all shades of opinion. They were conservatives led by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, socialists led by Jawaharlal Nehru, and there are other people also. Okay, with different ideas or different suggestions. The principle of deliberation. The authority of constitution does not come only from the fact that it was broadly, though not perfectly representative. It comes from the procedures it adopted to frame the constitution and the values its members brought to their deliberations. While in any assembly that claims to be representative, it is desirable that diverse sections of the society participate. It is equally important that they participate not only as representatives of their own identity or community. Each member deliberated upon the constitution with the interest of the whole nation in mind. There were often disagreements amongst members, but few of these disagreements could be traced to members protecting their own interest. Okay, there are legitimate differences of principle, and the differences were many. Should India adopt a centralized or decentralized system of government? What should be? So these are the questions that arose during the time of framing this constitution. Okay, only one provision of constitution was passed without virtually any debate: the introduction of universal suffrage, meaning all citizens reaching a certain age would be entitled as voters. Okay, irrespective of their differences. Okay, while the members felt no need at all to discuss the issue of who should have the right to vote, every other matter was seriously discussed and debated. Nothing can be a better testament to the democratic commitment of the Assembly. The Constitution drew its authority from the fact that members of the Constituent Assembly engaged in what one might call public reason. Members of the Assembly placed a great emphasis on discussion and reasoned argument. They did not simply advance their own interest, but gave principled reasons to other members of their position. The very act of giving reasons to others makes you move away from simply a narrow consideration of your own interest, because you have to give reasons to others to make them go along with their point. The voluminous debates. So suppose you are giving that you saying that India should be a socialist nation. So you need to provide reasons for it. Okay, why? What are the benefits of socialism? How are we going to achieve it? All these things should be discussed, right? And these points should be given. So proper scrutiny, proper discussions, proper debates were done on all these aspects. Okay, now procedures. The importance of public reason was emphasized in the mundane procedures of the assembly as well. The Constituent Assembly had 8 major committees. Okay, we will discuss the 8 major committees now. So this is a major committees. We have drafting committee. It was led by B.R. Ambedkar. Then committee on the rules of procedure, we had Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Steering committee, again Rajendra Prasad. Again finance and staff committee, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Now credential committee, it was led by Alladi Sri Krishna Swami Iyer. Alladi Krishna Swami Iyer. House committee, Pattabi Sitaramaya. Then order of business committee, We had K. Munshi. Again, House Committee on National Flag, it was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Committee on Functions of Constituent Assembly, J.V. Mavlankar. Then States Committee was under Jawaharlal Nehru. Then Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minority and Tribal and Excluded Areas, it was under Vallabhbhai Patel. Minorities of Subcommittee, H.C. Mukherjee. Okay, it is a subcommittee, not the same as the committee headed by Vallabhbhai Patel. Then Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, it was headed by J.B. Kripalani. Northeast Frontier Tribal areas and Assam excluded, all that area it was under Gopinath Bardolai. The excluded and partially excluded areas, it was by A.B. Thakur. Then Union Powers Committee, Union Constitution Committee, draft, and it was under Jawaharlal Nehru. And Drafting Committee, again, it was by B.R. Ambedkar. So usually Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, or B.R. Ambedkar chaired these committees. Okay, these were not men who agreed with each other on many. Now we are looking into the differences between each people, how each people had differences in the Constituent Assembly. Okay, the Ambedkar had been a bitter critic of Congress and Gandhi. Okay, accusing them of not doing enough for the upliftment of the scheduled caste. Okay, Patel and Nehru disagreed on many issues. Patel was a conservative, Nehru was a socialist. Okay, nevertheless, they all worked together. Each committee usually drafted particular provisions of the constitution, which were then subjected to debate by the entire assembly. Usually, an attempt was made to reach a consensus with belief that provisions agreed to by all would not be detrimental to any particular interest. Some provisions were subject to the vote, but in each instance, every single argument, query, or concern was responded to with great care and in writing. Okay, the assembly met for 166 days, spread over 2 years and 11 months. Its sessions were open to press and the public alike. Suppose if there is a question that relates to nationalist movement and Constituent Assembly. Now, this paragraph would be beneficial for you. So, but no constitution is simply a product of the assembly that produces it. Assembly, as diverse as the Constituent Assembly of India, could not be functioned if there was no background concepts or the main principles of constitution should enshrine. Okay, if there was no nationalist movement, the constitution would not have been there. Am I right? These principles were forged during the long struggle for freedom. In a way, the Constituent Assembly was giving concrete shape and form of the principles it had inherited from the nationalist movement. For decades preceding the promulgation of the Constitution, the nationalist movement had debated many questions that were relevant for the making of the Constitution. The shape and form of the government of India should have, the values it should uphold, the inequalities it should overcome. Answers for those debates were given their final form in the Constitution. Perhaps the best summary of the principles that nationalist movement brought to the Constitution Assembly is the objective resolution. The resolution that defined aims of the Assembly. And it was moved by who? Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in 1946. This resolution encapsulated the aspirations and values behind the Constitution. What the previous section terms as substantive provisions of the Constitution is inspired by and summed up by the values incorporated by the objective resolution. Based on this resolution, our Constitution gave institutional expression to these fundamental commitments. What are they? Equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, and a cosmopolitan identity. Thus, our Constitution is not merely a maze of rules and procedures, but a moral commitment to establish a government that will fulfill many promises that nationalist movement held before the people. Okay, these are the main points of the objective resolution. Just go through it. It was moved by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay, institutional arrangements. Okay, the third factor in ensuring effectiveness of a constitution is a balanced arrangement of institutions of government. The basic principle is that government must be democratic and committed to the welfare of the people. The Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on evolving the right balance among the various institutions like the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. This led to the adoption of parliamentary form and the federal arrangement, which would distribute government powers between legislatures and executive on one hand and between the states and the central government on the other. Okay, while evolving the most balanced governmental arrangements, the makers of our constitution did not hesitate to learn from experiments and experiences of our country. So one of the criticism of the constitution is that it is copied from other constitutions, but actually what happened, it is Ambedkar would say it is actually we ransacked, we collected the effective or good points from other constitutions and put it in our constitution. Okay, what we found would help, we took it. Okay, thus the framers of the constitution were not averse to borrowing from other constitutional traditions. Indeed, it is a testament of their wide learning that they could lay their hands upon an intellectual argument or historical example that has necessary for fulfilling a task at hand. But borrowing these ideas was not a slavish imitation, far from it. Each provision of the constitution had to be defended on grounds on how it's suited to Indian problems. For example, the secularism. In the Western concept, secularism is a separation of religion from state. But in our country, secularism is basically we keep a certain checks and balances on the religion. If the social or if justice is not given to a certain community or certain community within the religion is avoided, the government will enter into the scene and ensure that the justice is done. Okay, for example, the cases of Shabarimala, the cases of Triple Talaq, all these cases, the government intervened and made sure that certain order, certain justice was done. Okay, now what all we adopted? From British constitution, we first passed the post-parliamentary form of government. We took the idea of rule of law, the institution of speaker on his or her role, lawmaking procedure. From Irish constitution, DPSP, that is Directive Principles of State Policy. Now from French constitution, principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. Now from United States of America, we took the Charter of Fundamental Rights, important. Now power of judicial review and the independence of judiciary. Now Canadian constitution, we took a quasi-federal form of government, okay, in which the central has more power than the state governments. Okay, the idea of residual powers also from Canadian constitution. So that's it, guys, for the for today, based on the making of the constitution, why constitution is important. I hope all these questions were answered in this lecture. So until next time we meet again, God bless you guys. Jai Hind.